Welcome to Faith and Freedom 250, a series from the Herzog Foundation celebrating how faith has shaped America's story. Today we're looking back at how Christian conviction fueled one of the most important moral movements in our nation's history, the fight to end slavery.
For nearly as long as slavery existed in the New World, true Christ followers were at the forefront of the fight for abolition. To many believers, slavery was completely incompatible with biblical teachings and beliefs. True people of faith did not have to look very far to find ample ammunition in Scripture to combat slavery. They pointed to stories of deliverance, the Exodus, the Babylonian captivity, and the freedom promised through Christ. And they leaned on the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
For these Christians, freedom and human dignity weren't just political ideas, they were biblical truths. Slavery violated God's law, which centered on love and justice. So it's no surprise that some of the first people to condemn slavery were reformed-minded believers, the kind who took their faith seriously enough to challenge the world around them.
The movement began earlier than most Americans realize. As far back as the 1600s, the Society of Friends, better known as the Quakers, spoke out against slavery. Before the American Revolution even began, they banned the practice among their own members and petitioned Pennsylvania's government to outlaw it. Their faith-driven activism spread. In 1777, Vermont became the first state to ban slavery in its constitution. Within a generation, other northern states followed: Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey, all by 1804. Behind those victories were Christians who saw abolition as a moral and spiritual duty.
During America's Second Great Awakening, abolition gained even greater momentum. Preachers delivered fiery sermons declaring slavery a sin against God. They called on believers to pursue personal holiness and to join the abolition movement. Out of this revival came the American Anti-Slavery Society, founded in 1833. Even theology students at Lane Theological Seminary in Ohio abandoned their studies to dedicate themselves to the cause.
One of the most powerful voices was Angelina Grimke, a Southern Christian woman expelled from her church for her abolitionist views. Writing in the Liberator in 1836, she published her Appeal to the Christian Women of the South, where she combined Scripture with the principles of America's founding documents. She wrote, "If it is a self-evident truth that all men everywhere and of every color are born equal and have inalienable rights to liberty, then it is equally true that no man can be born a slave." Her words called Christians to confront both the moral and national hypocrisy of slavery.
A few years later, Theodore Weld added fuel to the fire with his 1839 publication, American Slavery as It Is. Drawing from first-hand accounts, Weld exposed the brutality of the slave system and awakened the conscience of a nation.
The abolition movement was led not only by white Christians, but by African American Christians who had gained their freedom. Among the notable examples was Richard Allen, founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. His message relied on the premise that Christianity demanded freedom and equality. Frederick Douglass used scriptural texts to explain the unnatural institution of slavery and compared the Christianity of Christ to the slave-holding Christianity of America to show in sharp relief the conflict between the two. And Harriet Tubman, who gained the moniker the Moses of her people, often compared her Underground Railroad to the Exodus story of the Old Testament. Tubman relied on prayer and Scripture for guidance.
It wasn't just individuals. Christian institutions and publishers joined the fight too. When many denominations couldn't agree on slavery, many split apart rather than compromise their convictions. In 1846, the American Missionary Association formed to educate freed slaves and promote Christian principles of equality. Oberlin College, a Christian school in Ohio, became one of the first to admit African American students and a leader in the abolition cause.
Christian publications carried the message far and wide. The Emancipator regularly quoted Scripture to expose the sin of slavery. But no book shook the public conscience like Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Through powerful storytelling rooted in biblical truth, She revealed the evil and moral corruption of slavery for all to see.
No account of the abolition movement and its Christian founders would be complete without mentioning William Lloyd Garrison, who published The Liberator from 1831 until the 13th Amendment was passed in 1865. His publication did much to advance and nationalize the movement. In addition, he was instrumental in forming the American Anti-Slavery Society, which plainly framed the issue in religious and moral terms with their belief that slave holding is a heinous crime in the sight of God, and that duty, safety, and best interests of all concerned require its immediate abandonment without expatriation. Their message was clear. A nation that claimed to serve God could not continue to enslave his children.
The passage of the 13th Amendment was a triumph of faith as much as politics, the culmination of generations of Christian conviction and perseverance. But even after slavery ended, the work of healing and rebuilding had only begun.
When we think of the abolition movement today, we often remember the political struggle, but we forget its deeply Christian roots. Those roots stretched back more than a century before America's founding. They were nourished by believers who refused to accept that injustice could coexist with faith.
It was not just from the pulpit that Christ-following ministers led the fight. It took faith-driven men and women of every social status and class to join the crusade. They all contributed with their words and actions, dollars and votes, to fulfill the promise of abolition and bring freedom to a people long held in bonds.
The story of abolition is proof of what can happen when faith inspires courage. It was the steadfast conviction of Christians, guided by Scripture and empowered by love, that moved the nation toward justice. I'm Darrell Jones with the Herzog Foundation. Join us next time on Faith and Freedom 250 as we celebrate the Christian foundations that continue to shape the American story.